Please be seated. Do you remember last week when I said that the Beatitudes were the preamble of this sermon that Jesus is preaching? Today we get into the meat of this sermon. Jesus is telling us two things. First, you are the salt of the earth. You, emphatic. Not the person sitting next to you. Not when you are old enough or good enough or smart enough. Not if you do this or that, but now. Salt is used for flavoring and as a preservative. It was a rare but necessary commodity, and was so important in some places that it was even used as currency. Several years ago, there was a movie that came out called The Bucket List. One person commented, cast a couple of aging megastars as seniors who have put together a do-before-you-die list of outrageous escapades. Then have them carry on like out-of-control adolescents, and while they drain the bottomless well of age-old jokes. The premise is valid if you view this life as all there is. Get it in, get it all done, next stop, oblivion. But that's not God's way. He has His own list for us. We are here for a purpose, and that purpose might include going various places, but it might be just staying right where we are. This life is not all there is. And God is preparing us, all of us, to be with Him in heaven someday. The second thing that Jesus says is, you are the light of the world. Again, emphatic. Not someone else, not some other day, but now. One thing on my bucket list was to go to Israel, to walk the trails that Jesus walked. I think that trip that we took helped me to become a better preacher and teacher because of what I learned while I was there. We made that trip the summer between my last 2 years in seminary. When we went to Israel, we visited a city called Sepphoris. I had never heard of this city that's only 3 miles from Nazareth. The speculation was that Joseph and even Jesus probably found work in this thriving and growing metropolis, a new city of Herod's time intended to be his capital. It was situated on a hill visible from Nazareth, an hour's walk. It may very well have been what Jesus was thinking about when he said, "A city on a hill cannot be hid." As day laborers, Joseph and Jesus quite likely started out before daybreak and headed to work, walking along toward this lighted city on the hill. Let your light shine like that city built on a hill. 3 of our lessons today speak of light, and I think this speaks clearly about who we are and what we are to be about. This is the season of Epiphany, the season of light, and the revealing of Jesus Christ to the world. Our first lesson, Isaiah says, if you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, offer food to hungry, then your light shall rise in the darkness. Verse 4 of our psalm read, light shines in the darkness for the upright, and the righteous are merciful and full of compassion. Our gospel lesson from Matthew says, you are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and praise your Father who is in heaven. One day when I was teaching math at Santa Fe High School, one of my students came up to me and said, Mrs. Dorr, you're a Christian, aren't you? And I replied, yes, and she responded, I can tell by the way you treat us. That's only part of what Jesus means when he tells us to let our light shine. Another time I was driving in Houston and I came up to a corner where several people were begging for money. Quite often I did not stop and did not give money. But this particular day there was a woman holding up a sign. I don't know, something about needing bus money to go home. Well, I knew I had two $1 bills in my pocket. So I reached in, pulled out two bills, and when I got ready to hand them to her, it was two $5 bills. I went ahead and handed them to her. And you could tell that she was on automatic, that she'd been there for a while, saying thank you when people would hand her money. Because she started doing that, she took the money and she said, praise God. So that they can see the good works you do and give praise to your Father who is in heaven. And if you don't have to leave your home to let your light shine. This is the thing. We need to all be letting our light shine. You don't have to leave home. Most of you remember Carol Ann Mills. She's going through a really rough time right now, and she isn't able to get out of the house for anything other than doctor's appointments. But yesterday, I received a very nice card of encouragement from her. Even though she can't get out, she is still letting her light shine. Grace Church is called to do that same thing, to let your light shine right here in Alvin, not to waver during this time of transition, but to be a beacon of hope, shining out on this corner of Lang and Hardy. The challenge for Grace is to make sure that the light doesn't waver during this time. And the way we do that is by plugging into that lesson from St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Paul claims that he is not trying to be fancy or wise in coming to the Corinthians. He came in humility to demonstrate the Spirit and power of God. There is a branch of theology called apologetics. It's not about making apologies for our faith, but it is about using reason and knowledge and wisdom to convince people of some theological point. Although it is a time-honored method of pressing your point in the face of opposition, the problem with apologetics is that it is the same idea used by the Pharisees to argue their points. And you'll notice that Jesus does not engage in theological debates of this kind. Instead, he demonstrates God's love by healing people, by driving out demons, by feeding people, and by raising them from the dead. He showed the power of God's love by reaching out to those around him, by touching them in the deepest way possible. God gives us his Spirit and empowers us with his love and his gifts. Not everyone has the same gift. Not everyone experiences God in the same way. We do those things that God calls us to do, and each one of us, working together, form a community of saints living together for the love of Christ. I encourage you as a church and as individual members of this entity known as Grace Church in Alvin, to look at the gifts that God has given you, to consider where God is calling you to serve during this in-between time. During this period without a full-time rector, each one of you becomes more important to the life of this congregation. After all, this is your church. It has been here for a long time because people like you have persevered to make it what it is today. In this life, here on earth, people come and people go and things happen. But God's promise is to be with us, to be here for us, to guide us and to satisfy us. As we make ourselves available to Him, then He fills us with His Spirit so that we can become a spring of living water to quench the thirst of those around us, those who hunger and thirst for life abundant. So I encourage you not to be anxious. Just enjoy being in God's presence, knowing that He is opening up a new chapter in the life of this church community. He will walk you through this time, and He will never desert you. I just thank God that He has gifted me with the blessing of being with you for this leg of your journey. I've been floated in and out, but I really appreciate the fact that God has brought me back home to help you transition. I look forward to seeing what God is doing in this place and to see the unfolding of His hand and presence in new ways. Amen.